The night was quiet, but not peaceful. The wind screamed across the frozen plains like a wounded beast, and the cold bit into everything it touched. The sky above was a sheet of black filled with faint stars that seemed too far away to care about. One lonely human struggling to stay alive in the middle of nowhere. Daniel sat inside his small emergency tent, his fingers wrapped tightly around a cracked thermal mug that barely kept the liquid inside warm. The walls of the tent shifted with each gust of wind, and the heater buzzed low as it tried to hold back the deadly freeze outside. Daniel had landed here by accident. His drop pod veered off course during atmospheric re-entry. The rest of his crew was likely hundreds of kilometers away, maybe dead, maybe searching for him, maybe thinking he was the one who didn't make it. But he wasn't dead, not yet. He had rations, tools, and a working survival tent. He had heat and signal beacons, and a mind that refused to give up. But even then the cold was winning little by little, stealing his strength every hour and feeding him silence. Then something changed. A faint sound outside, soft at first, like the crunch of boots or maybe paws or maybe claws moving across frozen ground. Daniel froze the mug halfway to his lips. Every instinct told him to be still, to listen, to wait. Then it came again, this time closer. A slow, dragging movement followed by a shape brushing against the tent's outer shell, and then the zipper started to move. The flap twitched like it was breathing, and Daniel's hand dropped to the weapon beside his leg, fingers closing around the cold metal grip. Zipper inched downward with slow, careful pulls, like whoever or whatever was outside did not want to. He heard Daniel didn't move. His breath was shallow, his pulse quick, but steady. When the flap finally opened, the wind poured in cold as death, and carrying something else, the scent of blood or smoke or something sharp and unfamiliar. And then she appeared, not a beast, not a soldier, not a threat, at least not immediately. It was a girl, or someone who looked like one small, thin, wrapped in strange layers of fabric and armor. Pieces that didn't match. Her eyes were wide, glowing faintly with a soft blue light, and her face, though alien, was close enough to human to stir confusion in his thoughts. Her skin was pale, with a shimmer that looked like ice, but she was shivering not from fear but from the cold, and her lips moved slowly as she tried to speak. Daniel raised the weapon higher, but she didn't flinch. She simply pointed inside the tent, and then at herself. Her voice cracked weak, barely more than a whisper, as she said, warm, only one word, no threat, no demand, only a plea. And Daniel in that moment felt something shift, not just in the air, but inside him as well. He lowered the weapon just a little, not fully convinced, but not willing to watch someone die on his doorstep either. He moved aside. She crawled in slowly, like a wounded animal testing his kindness. She pulled the flap closed behind her and sat near the heater, but not too close, as if unsure whether she had the right to take its warmth. Daniel stared at her, eyes scanning for weapons, implants, signs of deception, but found nothing beyond the scars that ran along her arms and neck, faint glowing lines like circuitry that had been burned in rather than installed. She looked at him with tired eyes and said thank you, not in his language, but the translator device clipped to her shoulder caught the word and whispered it back in English. Daniel didn't respond right away, his mind filled with questions. Who was she? Where did she come from? Why was she alone on this frozen planet? And most of all, why did it feel like she was not just seeking warmth, but something else, something deeper outside? The storm screamed louder, as if angry that she had found shelter, but inside the tent there was a strange silence, not empty, not safe, but something in between. Like the moment before a story truly begins. Daniel poured the last of his heated drink into a second cup and handed it to her. She took it with trembling hands, and for a second their eyes met, not with trust, not yet, but with something that could become trust if the night was long enough and they both survived it. Heater buzzed. The tent held the storm at bay, and two strangers sat across from each other in the smallest warmth the universe could offer, a human and an alien girl thrown together by accident or fate, neither knowing what would happen next, neither realizing that their meeting was only the beginning of something far more dangerous, far more complicated, and far more human than either of them expected. The storm outside showed no signs of slowing, and the wind pressed harder against the tent walls, as if trying to peel them away and carry them into the sky. Daniel sat cross-legged on the insulated floor, his eyes occasionally drifting toward the alien girl who now rested just an arm's length away. Mira, that was the name she had shared after several failed attempts at conversation, filtered through the crackling translator. Her voice carried an unfamiliar rhythm, but her words slowly grew clearer, and her tone became calmer each time she spoke. Daniel could not decide what bothered him more, the silence or the calm with which she accepted her place inside his shelter. She asked for nothing beyond warmth, took only what was given, and offered quiet glances. Filled with something he could not yet name, he wanted to believe. She was just another lost soul, just another survivor thrown into the cold. Like him, but her presence raised more questions than answers, and there was a weight in the air that even the heater could not melt. As hours passed, she began to speak more with her hands, drawing images in the air, symbols from her language that shimmered faintly as if her skin carried remnants of light. He could not understand the shapes, but he watched, closely fascinated by the way her fingers moved like a dance between meanings. She talked about her world, a place of endless skies and golden clouds, a place now shattered by war and ambition and exile, and though the words were few, the sorrow in her voice was heavy like a storm she carried with her. Daniel tried to match her openness by talking about Earth, his home, his memories, his childhood, moments he barely remembered until now, stories of warmth and sun and oceans, stories of old buildings filled with books and markets where smells danced in the air. Mira listened without blinking, her eyes never leaving his face, and sometimes she nodded as if she had dreamed such places, but never touched them. There was a moment when Myra reached toward one of the heat coils and paused, her fingers hovering just above the glow, and Daniel almost stopped her, but before he could speak, the markings on her skin lit up softly, pulsing in a pattern that felt too precise to be natural. The tense internal display flickered, the power lines buzzed strangely, and Daniel's pulse quickened. She pulled her hand away, and the lights returned to normal, but the question now burned in his thoughts. What exactly was she? He began checking the systems, without making it obvious, trying to see if anything had been accessed or altered. But everything seemed fine, and yet he knew it wasn't. The tent felt different, not broken, not damaged, but altered in some quiet, invisible way, and he wondered if the change came from her, or if she was simply reacting to something already inside. Later, she fell asleep, or at least entered a state that looked like sleep, her body curled up near the heater, her breath slow and steady. Daniel watched her for while his own thoughts refusing to settle. There was beauty in the way she rested, a strange softness that did not match the danger he suspected she carried, and he found himself wondering who she really was, not her name or her origin, but what she had been made to be and what she had chosen to become. He took out his datapad and began recording quiet notes, not out of fear, but out of instinct. Mira, alien, female, unknown species, humanoid traits, limited communication, translator, functional skin. Shows reactive light patterns, unknown energy interaction, purpose, unclear behavior. Non-hostile for now. He looked back at her and noticed something new. One of the scars on her wrist was glowing, slowly fading in and out like a heartbeat, and for a brief second he thought he saw a tiny thread of light moving from that scar into the floor of the tent, almost like a signal seeking connection. He leaned closer, but the thread vanished the moment he moved. The tent was silent again, except for the wind outside and the slow rhythm of her breath. Daniel felt the weight of exhaustion settle into his bones, but he did not sleep, not yet. Something about this night demanded wakefulness, demanded watchfulness, demanded answers he did not yet have. He did not know if she had come to him by chance or design, but he knew the moment she entered his tent, the balance of the universe around him had shifted, and whether that shift would save him or destroy him was a truth still waiting in the silence between heartbeats and in the warmth that two strangers now shared beneath an alien sky. Darkness lingered across the endless ice fields while the storm howled above like a beast searching for prey. But inside the small tent the air had grown warmer, not just from the heater humming near their feet, but from something unspoken, something hidden behind careful glances and unasked questions. Daniel sat with his back against the inner wall, eyes half-closed, body tired, but mind sharp every breath. From Mira seemed to echo a little too long in the space between them, as if the air itself was listening. The girl had not moved for hours, her form still and silent, as though carved from the cold itself, but just as Daniel allowed his eyes to slip shut, he felt a shift, the kind of movement, too quiet to wake a sleeping man, but not quiet enough to escape. One who had trained for survival in places where silence was a warning, and stillness was the breath before danger. He kept his eyes mostly closed, watching her reflection in the small metallic panel across from him, and saw her rise, not suddenly, not like a predator, but with purpose and grace, her body unfolding with quiet tension, like a wave preparing to strike. She knelt near the center of the tent, her fingers moving across the floor, tracing patterns only she could see, and the scars along. Her arms began to glow again, this time brighter, more alive. Daniel's datapad buzzed faintly, warning of unfamiliar signals within the area, but he did not move, not yet, because something about her movements felt more desperate than dangerous, and he needed to understand, not react. Not too soon, Mira whispered in her language, the words soft and fast and filled with a tone he could not translate. She pressed her palm against the floor, and a thread of light spread outward, crawling across the ground like a spider web, reaching into the fabric of the tent and feeding into the power nodes. Daniel's systems responded with brief flickers, and the backup generator sparked to life for a second, then returned to standby. Everything returned to normal, almost like nothing had happened, but Daniel had seen too much to call it harmless. He spoke her name, voice low and steady. Mira paused, her hand still on the floor, eyes locked onto his, as if calculating how much he had seen and how much she could still hide. She slowly sat back on her heels, and the glow faded from her skin, but her expression remained unreadable, neither fear nor guilt, only silence filled with meaning. She did not deny what she had done. Instead, she spoke with honesty, her words broken, but clear enough. I was made, not born, made for entry, made for silence, made for secrets. They called it purpose, but it feels like chains. Daniel did not interrupt. He waited while her voice trembled beneath its control. Her story unfolded, not in full detail, but enough to understand she had been part of something designed for infiltration. Her kind were crafted not to fight with weapons, but to slip inside enemy lines, gain trust, steal knowledge, and vanish before their lies unraveled. But something went wrong. Something inside her changed, and she ran, not because of fear, but because she began to question the truth they had given her. She said they told her humans were cruel, violent, selfish, unworthy of space. But when she watched from a distance, when she studied them, when she found him, when he offered her warmth, with no demand, no control, something shifted. A crack opened in the program, a flaw, or maybe something more human, something like guilt or maybe choice. Daniel felt the weight of her words, but he did not fully trust them, not yet, and he told her so, not to hurt her, but because survival required truth, and truth was rare in war. Mira nodded, understanding, not offended, her voice calm, as she replied, I would not trust me either, not yet. The moment held like ice, refusing to melt, both of them locked in a silence filled with questions, too large for one night. But before anything more could be said, the tent's warning sensors came to life, a blinking red alert spreading across the small screen. Unknown movement, approaching from the west at high speed. Not local wildlife, not weather, not human. It was something else. S eyes widened, not with surprise, but with a kind of dread, her voice quieter now, almost hollow. They found me. Daniel reached for his weapon, instincts returning like muscle memory, as his mind calculated the worst possibilities. Mira did not move to run. Instead, she sat perfectly still, her face turned toward the cold wind pressing against the outer fabric, and she whispered something in her language again, this time not to control or to connect, but something that sounded like a farewell, or maybe a prayer. Daniel realized then she had not come into his tent by accident. She had come running from something far worse than the storm, and whatever was about to reach them was not just after her, it was after everything she had touched, including him. Calm had been a lie, the silence had been a trap, and the warmth between them had become the one thing her creators would never allow. The lights inside the tent flickered once more as the warning alert grew stronger, its silent red glow pulsing faster with each passing second. Daniel stood now fully awake, heart pounding with a rhythm that matched the urgency of the moment, his mind already scanning through possibilities and outcomes, his hands moving without hesitation, checking the sidearm, securing the emergency pack, and scanning the terrain data from the sensors. The storm outside had weakened, but something worse had taken its place. Something mechanical and fast was heading directly toward them. Myra remained seated near the heater, her face strangely calm, as if she had expected this end from the very beginning. Her glowing marks dimmed but not gone, and her eyes now focused on something far away, not the tent, not Daniel, but a memory or a message. Only she could see when he asked her what was coming. She answered with a voice no longer shaking, not soft, not afraid, only tired. They are not here to ask questions. They are here to erase the evidence. I became evidence when I did not obey. I became a threat when I started to feel. Daniel wanted to be angry, wanted to blame her for the danger now bearing down on them, but he could not find that anger, not after all they had shared in the past hours. She had the chance to end him, to steal everything he had, but she did not. Instead, she shared stories of broken skies and distant suns. Instead, she asked about oceans and laughter and warmth. And now, as destruction closed in, she spoke of sacrifice. She rose to her feet slowly, her frame smaller than his, but somehow stronger in presence. She walked to the tent entrance, not to open it, but to listen. Her skin reacting to frequencies in the air, vibrations he could not detect, but she could understand clearly. They are scanning for my signal. They are locked on me. If I leave now, they might not follow you. Daniel shook his head, not out of heroism, but logic. It would not be that simple. If they erased her, they would still question how she failed what she revealed, who helped her, and in that equation his name was already written. He told her running alone would not save either of them, and that if she was truly done following orders, then now was the time to make a new choice, not just to survive, but to fight back. For a moment Mira did not speak, her expression unreadable. Then slowly she reached into the strap across her chest and pulled out small device, its surface smooth like stone, but alive with energy. It pulsed in her hand in rhythm with her breath. She explained it was part of her core, part of what made her more than flesh. It stored information and memory and programs too dangerous to exist freely. She had been ordered to protect it above all else, but now she offered it to him, not to hold, not to steal, but to help destroy with. If they could send a false signal, reroute the tracking data, and confuse the machines long enough to act. Daniel understood her plan quickly. It was a gamble, and the cost would be the tent, the heater, the only safety they had built in this frozen land. They would need to rig the core into the power system, overload the circuits, and let the false code burst out like a dying flare. It would trigger the pursuers to reset, to scan a wider range and delay their next move, and during that delay, they could escape. Maybe not far, but far enough to survive. They worked in silence, not because of fear, but because focus demanded it. Mira rewired the core with a precision born of design, while Daniel set the generator to accept the unstable surge. Every movement was a piece of rebellion. Every wire twisted was a moment stolen back from the ones who shaped her for control. When the system was ready, they stood at the edge of the tent, waiting for the final sequence to complete. Their eyes met, not as allies, not as enemies, but as two beings who had nothing left but each other. He told her she did not have to prove anything, not to him, not anymore. But Mira smiled gently, her voice steady. This is not about proof. This is about ending the story. They wrote for me so I can start my own. The core lit up like a star, and the ground shook slightly as the pulse began to build, a wave of false data spreading across the ice, reaching for the machines, racing toward them. The final overload would burn the tent and everything inside, but it might also burn the leash that kept her bound to them. Daniel took one last look at the shelter that had saved his life, and then at the girl who had changed it without a word. They ran into the storm side by side, wind cutting against their skin. But no longer stopping their steps behind them, the tent glowed. Once then vanished in a burst of blinding white. The snow swallowed the sound and light like it never happened, and only their footprints remained leading away into the unknown. The ice stretched endlessly in every direction, a silent ocean of white that hid no life, no mercy, and no welcome. The cold pressed against them from all sides, like invisible hands trying to push them back, drag them down into stillness. But Daniel and Mira kept moving, their steps uneven, their breath heavy, their bodies weak from exhaustion, but their minds locked on a single thought: keep going. No matter what happens, just keep moving through the snow, through the wind, through the silence that followed the burst of light behind them. Blast from the tent had wiped away every signal, every heat trace, every mechanical echo, and for a short time, the drones that chased them had stopped, confused by the pulse. Chasing shadows that did not exist, it was not victory, but it was time, and time was the only thing they needed right now, time to reach higher ground, where the backup beacon might have survived the crash, time to find another shelter or send one last message to command, time to escape the death that was programmed to follow them. Mira walked with slow steps, her body not built for this kind of exposure. Her skin dimmer now, the glowing scars losing rhythm, her breathing shallower than before. Daniel kept close, watching her closely, offering his strength whenever hers faltered, and though she never asked, he saw the way she leaned into his presence, as if the warmth she once borrowed from his tent now came from him directly. Something had changed between them, not just in action, but in understanding. No longer two strangers, no longer hunter and target, just two souls trying to reach one more sunrise. As they climbed a frozen ridge, Mira stumbled once, her knees striking the hard ground. Her breath caught, and for a moment she stayed still, as if the effort to rise again cost more than she had left. Daniel knelt beside her, lifting her carefully and pressing her hand against his chest to remind her that a heart was still beating. Close to her, not hers, not built, not programmed, but real and human and steady, and for reasons neither of them could explain, it gave her enough to rise again. At the top of the ridge they found what remained of an old emergency tower, its frame bent by storms and time, its panel cracked, but its beacon still blinking faintly like a heartbeat, struggling through the snow. Daniel moved fast, clearing debris, powering the backup cell, rerouting the signal until the tower came alive again, sending out a cry across the stars, a simple message: survivor, coordinates, request extraction. No encryption, no code, only hope. They collapsed inside the hollow structure, Mira leaning against the metal wall, Daniel wrapping both of them in the last thermal cover. Watching the weak light above flicker like a tiny sun, Mira spoke softly, her voice almost gone. They will not stop, they will come again, not now, but one day. I will always be a mark they left behind. And he replied with equal calm, maybe they will come, but next time you will not be running, you will not be alone. Time passed slowly inside the broken tower, hours turning into stillness, until finally the sky above cracked open, not from storm but from engines. A rescue ship hovering with its lights cutting through the clouds, descending with care, as if the world itself had decided to offer them one final mercy. Daniel carried Mira into the light hands, shaking, eyes burning, but his grip never loosened, and the crew pulled them both aboard without questions, only silent awe at the sight of two figures rising from the cold inside the ship. Mira was taken to the med bay, her body placed under scanners that flickered in confusion, unable to fully read her structure, unable to fully understand what she was. A nurse asked Daniel who she was, and he answered with a voice that held no doubt, she is the one who changed everything. She is not a threat, she is not a weapon, she is a survivor, and that is enough. Later, as the ship left orbit and the stars grew brighter through the window, Daniel sat beside her, watching as her eyes opened, slowly blinking against the soft light. She looked at him, no words needed, because the silence between them now carried no fear, only a bond made not from duty or design but from shared fire and hard choices. She reached out, not to ask for help, but to give it, her fingers brushing his. Hand with a touch that once belonged to a stranger, now belonging to something else entirely. And in that moment, as the stars passed quietly, and the ship carried them away from the world that tried to end them, the warmth between them remained the last fire that refused to die, not born from flame, not born from code, but born from the simplest truth that even in the darkest places, something human can still survive, something real can still begin, and even a girl made for betrayal can choose to be something more. The end.